Ethan Montgomery gazed over the Manhattan skyline from his penthouse office, the empire of luxury resorts his family had built over 3 generations, sprawled across digital displays on the wall. At 32, he had everything most people spent, their lives chasing wealth, power, status, yet he felt nothing but the weight of golden handcuffs tightening around his wrists. "The board expects your decision by tomorrow, Ethan." His father's voice cut through his thoughts. Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Luxury Experiences, stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of impatience and expectation. "The merger with the Chandler hotel chain depends on this engagement. Sandra Chandler is an excellent match. Harvard Business School knows the industry inside out. Your marriage will secure our position as the undisputed leaders in luxury hospitality across the Americas." Ethan nodded mechanically, the way he'd been nodding at business proposals his entire life. "I'll have an answer tomorrow," he replied, knowing his father wouldn't leave without some form of acknowledgement. When the door finally closed, Ethan loosened his tie and slumped into his chair. On his desk sat the small velvet box containing a 5-carat diamond engagement ring, not chosen by him, but by the Montgomery family jeweler who had served them for decades. Even his proposal had been planned by others, scheduled for this weekend at the charity gala that would gather the country's elite at their flagship resort in the Hamptons. His phone buzzed with another message from Sandra, discussing media strategy for their engagement announcement. They'd known each other since prep school, 2 heirs of hospitality empires being groomed for an inevitable merger of assets disguised as marriage. Sandra wasn't unkind. She was simply a product of their world, where marriages were business arrangements and love was a luxury few could afford. Ethan stared at the message without responding, then opened his bottom drawer and pulled out a worn travel guide to coastal towns. For years, he'd been collecting these, little windows into lives he'd never live, places where people valued experiences over acquisitions. He flipped to a dog-eared page featuring a small town called Seaport Cove on the Oregon coast, its lighthouse standing tall against dramatic cliffs. Montgomery Resorts had recently acquired a boutique hotel there, the Lighthouse Inn, as part of their expansion into authentic local experiences for wealthy clients seeking controlled doses of rustic charm. According to the reports, it was still operating under its original management until the corporate takeover was complete. A plan began to form in Ethan's mind, reckless and impulsive, yet more appealing than anything he'd felt in years. What if he just disappeared? Not permanently, perhaps, but long enough to breathe outside the Montgomery bubble, to experience life without the weight of his name and all it represented. Before he could reconsider, Ethan was emptying his wall safe, taking only cash. He changed into the most casual clothes he owned, still designer but less conspicuous, and tossed a few essentials into a weathered backpack he'd bought years ago for a hiking trip that his father had ultimately cancelled for an emergency board meeting. He took a moment to look at himself in the bathroom mirror. With his neatly trimmed haircut and polished appearance, he still looked like what he was, a billionaire playing dress-up. On impulse, he grabbed scissors and roughly cut his hair, the dark locks falling into the sink. A week's worth of stubble would help complete the transformation. As he stepped into the private elevator, Ethan sent a brief email to his executive assistant, citing a personal emergency that would take him off-grid for a few days. It wouldn't buy him much time before they started looking, but it would be enough to disappear. Instead of his usual town car, Ethan hailed a taxi at the street corner, giving the driver directions to JFK Airport. There, he purchased a coach ticket to Portland, Oregon, something he hadn't done himself in over a decade, using cash and the alias Ethan Miller, a name common enough to blend in, close enough to his own that he'd remember to answer to it. "Starting fresh, huh?" the woman at the ticket counter remarked, noting his lack of luggage. "Something like that," Ethan replied, surprised by how literal her casual observation was. The flight was a culture shock. Cramped seats, crying babies, flight attendants too busy to cater to individual needs. Ethan found it strangely refreshing. Nobody recognized him. Nobody cared who he was. For the first time in years, he felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. From Portland, Ethan took a bus to the coast, watching through the window as skyscrapers gave way to suburbs, then to towering pine forests, and finally to glimpses of the Pacific Ocean between the trees. When he stepped off the bus in Seaport Cove, the salty air hit his lungs like a revelation. The town was postcard perfect, a main street lined with colorful shops, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, and the lighthouse standing sentinel on the cliff above. The Lighthouse Inn, his family's newest acquisition, sat on prime real estate overlooking the bay, its weathered white clapboard and blue shutters giving it a timeless charm that corporate renovations would soon erase. Ethan approached the front desk, backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'd like a room, please, nothing fancy," he said, still adjusting to the idea of being Ethan Miller, ordinary backpacker. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Betty, looked up from her computer. "We're actually pretty booked with the summer season. All I have left is one of our smallest rooms around back. The view's not great, but it's cozy." "That's perfect," Ethan replied, genuinely pleased with the idea of something modest. As Betty processed his check-in, the front door opened and a young woman rushed in, her arms laden with paper bags. "Sorry I'm late, Betty. The printer had issues with the new menus, and then Mrs. Larson's delivery was—" She stopped, noticing Ethan. "Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt." Ethan felt an unexpected jolt as their eyes met. She was striking, not in the polished way of the women in his social circle, but with a natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and freckles dusted her nose and cheeks. What caught him most, though, was the vivid intelligence in her green eyes. "No worries, honey," Betty said warmly. "This is Mr. Miller taking the Bayview room. Mr. Miller, this is Lily Collins, our jack-of-all-trades around here." "Just a room with no view," Ethan corrected with a smile, extending his hand. "Ethan." "Lily," she replied, shifting her bags, to shake his hand briefly. Her grip was firm, her hands slightly rough from work. "Welcome to Seaport Cove. You picked a great time to visit. The summer festival starts this weekend." Before Ethan could respond, a voice called from the back office. "Lily, did you bring those supply invoices? The corporate team is asking for them again." A shadow passed over Lily's face. "Duty calls," she said with a tight smile. "Enjoy your stay." As she disappeared into the back office, Betty sighed. "Poor girl works harder than anyone I know. Been here 5 years, worked her way up from housekeeping to assistant manager. Now with the new owners coming in, who knows what'll happen to any of us?" Ethan felt a twinge of guilt. New owners? "Some big resort chain from the East Coast," Betty said, handing him his key, an actual metal key, not a key cord. "They're turning this place into another one of those luxury spots where they charge you $20 for a bottle of water. Probably kick out all the locals who can actually afford to come here now." Ethan swallowed hard. "That's a shame." "It's the way of the world, I suppose," Betty shrugged. "People like us don't matter much to people like them." As Ethan took his key and headed to his room, those words echoed in his mind. For the first time, he was experiencing the other side of his family's business, not as the wealthy heir expanding an empire, but as the ordinary person being impacted by that expansion. His room was indeed small, with simple furnishings and a narrow window facing the back parking lot. It was probably the least expensive room in the hotel, the kind his company would eliminate first in the renovation, converting it to storage or part of a luxury suite. Yet, as Ethan set down his backpack and sat on the edge of the bed, he felt a strange sense of freedom in the modest space. He'd come to Seaport Cove on a whim, seeking a brief escape from his predetermined life. What he hadn't expected was to find himself face to face with the consequences of his family's business practices. Embodied in the hard-working staff of a small hotel his company was about to transform beyond recognition. And he certainly hadn't expected Lily Collins, whose bright eyes and genuine manner had affected him more in 30 seconds than any socialite had in years. Ethan lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He'd planned to stay for a few days at most before returning to reality. Now, looking around at the simple room that would soon be erased by his family's vision, he wondered if perhaps there was a reason his impulse had brought him here, to this specific place at this specific time. Lily Collins wiped down the bar counter, her mind elsewhere as the evening crowd at the Lighthouse Inn's restaurant began to thin. The corporate transition team had spent the entire afternoon in meetings, poring over every aspect of the hotel's operations. They'd barely acknowledged the staff, speaking about them rather than to them, as if they were entries on a spreadsheet, rather than people with lives and histories tied to this place. One more. Please, a voice interrupted her thoughts. Ethan Miller, the backpacker who'd checked in yesterday, slid his empty glass across the counter. 4 days into his stay, and he'd already become something of a fixture around the hotel, preferring the bar to the town's more tourist-oriented establishments. Long day exploring? Lily asked, refilling his glass with the local craft beer he'd taken a liking to. Just walking the beach, watching the boats, Ethan replied. I should be asking you about long days. You've been everywhere I've looked today. Reception, housekeeping. Here at the bar, do you ever take a break? Lily laughed, the sound genuine despite her exhaustion. Not lately. We're short-staffed, and with the corporate vultures circling, she caught herself. Sorry, that was unprofessional. No, please, be unprofessional, Ethan encouraged with a smile. It's refreshing. There was something about this man that put her at ease. Unlike the wealthy tourists who normally frequented the inn, treating staff like furniture, Ethan seemed genuinely interested in the people around him. His clothes were simple, his manner unassuming. When he asked questions, he actually listened to the answers. So what brings a solo traveler to our little town in the middle of peak season? Most backpackers hit the big natural attractions, not small fishing villages. Ethan took a sip of his beer, considering his answer. I needed space to think, he finally said. I was about to make a life decision that everyone else wanted for me, but that I wasn't sure about. It wasn't a lie, just a simplified version of his reality. Sounds serious, Lily replied, leaning against the counter. The bar had emptied except for an elderly couple in the corner. What kind of decision? Marriage, Ethan admitted, surprising himself with his candor. To someone I've known forever but never really loved. Lily raised her eyebrows. That's not a small thing. No, it's not. Ethan stared into his beer. What about you? Have you always lived in Seaport Cove? Born and raised, Lily said proudly. 4th generation. My great-grandparents were fishermen. This place is in my blood. She glanced around the bar with a mixture of affection and worry. That's why these corporate changes hit so hard. This isn't just a job, it's home. What will you do if the changes are too drastic? Ethan asked, fighting back his guilt. Lily's expression shifted to one of determination. Fight to stay, I guess. My grandmother's medical bills aren't paying themselves, and my brother's starting college in the fall. Moving isn't really an option right now. The mention of her family responsibilities struck Ethan deeply. While he'd been resisting a privileged fate, Lily was shouldering genuine burdens without complaint. What would you do, though, if you could do anything? He pressed. A soft smile transformed her face. I'd open my own place. Nothing fancy, just good food, good atmosphere, somewhere locals could afford, but tourists would enjoy. She pointed out the window toward a boarded-up building across the harbor. That old cannery would be perfect. Huge windows facing the water. History in the bones of the place. Why don't you? Lily laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sure, let me just pull $500,000 out of my tip jar. She shook her head. Sorry, it's just been a day. Between Grandma's health taking a turn this morning and these corporate guys making it clear most of us won't have jobs by fall. She straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. Anyway, I shouldn't dump my problems on a guest, I asked, Ethan said quietly. And I'm a pretty good listener if you ever want to talk. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. A recognition, perhaps, of a connection neither had expected to find. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a man in an expensive suit, his manner oozing artificial charm. Lily, just the person I was looking for. Mr. Reeves, Lily acknowledged, her warm demeanor cooling noticeably. Can I help you? James Reeves, the current manager of the Lighthouse Inn, placed a proprietary hand on the bar counter. I need you to come in early tomorrow. The Montgomery team wants a full staff presentation at 7. I can't, James. I have to take my grandmother to her doctor's appointment at 8. I already cleared it with Betty weeks ago. Reeves's smile didn't reach his eyes. Things change, Lily. If you want to be considered for retention after the transition, you need to show commitment. Ethan's grip tightened on his glass, recognizing the power play for what it was. My grandmother's health is non-negotiable, Lily said firmly. I'll be there by 9:30. Your choice, Reeves replied with a shrug that suggested it wasn't really a choice at all. His gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing his casual clothes and unruly hair with barely concealed disdain. Enjoying your stay, Mr. Miller, Ethan supplied. And yes, very much. Lily's been exceptionally helpful. How nice. Reeves's tone suggested it was anything but. Well, don't let our little local charm fool you. Soon this place will be unrecognizable in the best possible way. Of course, the Montgomery vision will transform this quaint operation into something truly world-class. I like it quaint, Ethan said mildly, though his jaw had tightened. Reeves gave him a condescending smile. That's because you don't know any better. He turned back to Lily. Staff meeting, 7 a.m., make it work. With that, he strode away. Is he always that pleasant? Ethan asked, once Reeves was out of earshot. Only on his good days, Lily replied, her attempt at humor falling flat. He came with the acquisition, the first harbinger of the Montgomery invasion. Used to manage one of their properties in California before they sent him to prepare us for transition. Ethan winced at hearing his family name spoken with such distaste. He seems like a real piece of work. He's ambitious, Lily said, wiping down the bar with more force than necessary. And he sees this takeover as his stepping stone to bigger things in the Montgomery Empire. The sound of his surname on her lips was jarring, a reminder of the deception at the heart of their interactions. Ethan fell silent, the weight of his true identity sitting uncomfortably between them. Sorry, Lily said, misinterpreting his silence. You came here to escape your problems, not listen to mine. No, it's not that, Ethan assured her quickly. I just hate seeing someone like him throw his weight around. Lily smiled, the simple expression lighting up her face in a way that made Ethan's heart beat faster. My knight in shining backpack, she teased, but I've dealt with worse than James Reeves. Still, if you need anything, he offered, leaving the sentence unfinished. Thanks, but I've got this. She glanced at the clock. We're closing up soon. Any last requests before I kick you out? Just one, Ethan said, surprising himself with his boldness. Would you show me around town tomorrow? Your version of it, not the tourist version. Lily hesitated, and for a moment Ethan thought she would refuse. Then she smiled again, a real smile that reached her eyes. I get off at 4. Meet me at the lighthouse path. The next day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed designed for postcards. Ethan spent the morning wandering the town, seeing it with new eyes after his conversation with Lily. He noticed how many of the shopkeepers knew each other, calling out greetings and inside jokes. He observed the local fishermen bringing in their daily catch, their boats weathered but well-maintained. There was a genuine community here, one that his family's business model threatened to disrupt. At the local coffee shop, he overheard conversations about the Montgomery takeover, the anxieties it was creating for employees and business owners alike. The planned renovations would raise prices beyond what locals could afford, transforming their community space into an exclusive playground for the wealthy. When 4 o'clock finally arrived, Ethan was waiting at the base of the lighthouse path, his stomach fluttering with anticipation that had nothing to do with the steep climb ahead. Lily appeared a few minutes later, changed from her work uniform into jeans and a simple blue top that brought out her eyes. Her hair was down, chestnut, waves catching the sunlight as she approached. Ready for the local experience? She asked with a smile. Lead the way, Ethan replied, falling into step beside her. They climbed the winding path to the lighthouse, Lily pointing out landmarks below, the beach where she'd built sandcastles as a child, the cove where locals gathered for bonfires away from tourist crowds, the high school where she'd graduated as valedictorian. Did you go to college? Ethan asked as they reached the top, slightly breathless from the climb. Portland State on scholarship, Lily replied, gazing out at the panoramic view. Business major with a culinary minor. Came back when my grandmother got sick. You put your dreams on hold for family, Ethan observed, thinking of how different her choices had been from his own. Lily shrugged. Not on hold, just rerouted. Grandma raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 10. My brother was only 2. She sacrificed everything for us. How could I not do the same for her? Her matter-of-fact recounting of personal tragedy hit Ethan hard. While he'd been complaining about the golden handcuffs of privilege, Lily had faced genuine hardship with grace and resilience. What about you? She asked as they descended toward the beach. Any family waiting for you to come to your senses and return home? A father who sees me as an investment that needs to perform according to projections, Ethan answered honestly. A mother who loves me, but has always chosen peace over confrontation, and a lot of expectations I'm not sure I want to meet. Hence the escape to nowhere, Lily nodded, understanding in her eyes. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring Lily's Seaport Cove, the hidden tide pools, the family-owned bakery with the best cinnamon rolls on the coast, the secluded bench at the edge of the harbor, where generations of locals had carved their initials. As sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, they found themselves sitting on that bench, sharing a bottle of local wine and the remains of a picnic dinner Lily had packed. Thank you for today, Ethan said quietly. I've traveled all over the world, but I've never seen a place quite like this. Lily smiled, her face softened by the fading light. That's what I keep trying to tell your boss, Mr. Reeves. The magic of this place isn't in luxury amenities, it's in its soul. But people like the Montgomerys don't understand that. They see dollar signs, not communities. The sound of his family. Name was like a dash of cold water. In the perfect bubble of the day, Ethan had almost forgotten who he really was. The guilt of his deception pressed on him, made worse by the genuine connection he felt growing between them. Maybe they just haven't seen it through the right eyes, he suggested carefully. Maybe, Lily conceded, though she sounded unconvinced. Or maybe they just don't care. Why would they? It's just business to them. Ethan wanted to defend himself, to tell her that he did care, that seeing the town through her eyes was changing everything for him. But to do so would mean revealing his lie, and he wasn't ready to lose the way she looked at him, like he was simply a man, not a Montgomery. What if they could see it differently? He asked instead. What would you show them, to make them understand? Lily turned to him, their faces close in the gathering dusk. Exactly what I showed you today, the real Seaport Cove. She hesitated, then added softly, but I doubt Ethan Montgomery would bother taking the time to see it. The sound of his real name on her lips, spoken with such dismissal, sent a chill through him. For the first time, Ethan truly understood the weight of the decision before him. He could return to New York, to the life mapped out for him, and become the man Lily thought him to be, someone who valued profit over people. Or he could find a different path, one that honored both his responsibilities and the values he was discovering here. What he couldn't do, he realized with growing clarity, was continue this deception much longer. Not with Lily looking at him with those honest eyes, sharing her dreams and fears so openly. You'd be surprised, he said finally. People can change when they see things differently. Lily studied his face in the fading light, as if trying to understand what lay beneath his words. That sounds like the voice of experience. Maybe it is, Ethan admitted. Meeting you has certainly changed my perspective on a lot of things. The admission hung between them, honest in a way that made his continued deception feel all the more wrong. But before he could say more, Lily's phone rang, shattering the moment. Her face grew serious as she answered. Yes, this is Lily Collins. What? When? I'll be right there. She hung up, her hands shaking slightly. I have to go. My grandmother's been taken to the hospital. I'll come with you, Ethan offered immediately. Lily shook her head. No. This is family stuff. I need to... She stood, gathering her things hastily. "I'm sorry to cut this short." "Don't apologize," Ethan insisted, standing with her. "Go, your grandmother needs you, but Lily—" He touched her arm gently. "When things settle, I'd like to talk. There's something I need to tell you." She nodded distractedly, already turning toward town. "Tomorrow, maybe. Thanks for understanding." As he watched her hurry away, Ethan knew he'd reached a crossroads. The connection he felt with Lily was unlike anything he'd experienced before. Real, challenging, transformative. But it was built on a foundation of deception that grew more unstable with each honest exchange between them. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would tell her the truth, whatever the consequences. Because something told him that what was growing between them might be worth risking everything for, even his identity as Ethan Montgomery. James Reeves sat alone in his office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face in the dim light. It was well past midnight, but sleep was far from his mind as he scrolled through employment files. Something about the backpacker, Ethan Miller, had been bothering him since their brief interaction at the bar. The man was too polished, his manners too refined for the casual traveler image he projected. The expensive watch poorly hidden under his sleeve hadn't escaped Reeves's notice either, a Patek Philippe that cost more than Reeves made in a year. A backpacker with a six-figure timepiece was an anomaly worth investigating. "Who are you really, Mr. Miller?" Reeves murmured, typing the name into various search databases. Nothing significant appeared. A few social media profiles that didn't match the face, some news articles about other Ethan Millers across the country. On impulse, he opened the hotel's security system and pulled up footage from the front entrance the day Miller had checked in. He watched the grainy video of the man approaching the desk, his gait confident despite the unassuming clothes. There was something familiar about him, something Reeves couldn't quite place. He ran the footage through an image enhancement program, focusing on Miller's face. As the resolution improved, Reeves sat back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, comparing the enhanced image to a recent article in Forbes featuring the Montgomery family. The resemblance was unmistakable, despite the hastily cut hair and casual clothing. Ethan Miller was none other than Ethan Montgomery, heir to the very empire currently acquiring the Lighthouse Inn. Reeves's mind raced with possibilities. Why? Would the Montgomery heir be staying incognito at his own property? Was he evaluating staff performance undercover, or was something more personal at play? He recalled the way Montgomery had been looking at Lily Collins at the bar, the obvious interest in his eyes. Reeves had noticed their growing closeness over the past few days. The special tours, the private conversations, the lingering glances. He'd assumed it was just another rich tourist flirting with local staff. But this changed everything. The Montgomerys were hospitality royalty, known for maintaining impeccable standards in their personal and professional lives. The family was currently finalizing a major merger through Ethan's engagement to the Chandler Hotel heiress, news that had been all over the business press. If the young Montgomery was hiding out here playing commoner while developing feelings, for a small-town hotel worker, the potential for scandal was enormous, and scandal meant leverage. Reeves leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. He'd been working for Montgomery Resorts for 7 years, climbing from front desk manager to property supervisor, but his ascent had stalled lately. The Lighthouse Inn assignment felt more like exile than opportunity, a test he needed to pass flawlessly to get back into the corporate fast lane. This discovery could be his ticket to the upper echelons of the company. Handled correctly, it could earn him Richard Montgomery's gratitude and a position at corporate headquarters. Handled incorrectly, it could end his career entirely. He needed more information before making his move, and he needed leverage over both players in this little drama. Turning back to his computer, Reeves pulled up Lily's employee file. There was nothing particularly remarkable in her work history. Steady promotions, excellent performance reviews, a few notes about her family circumstances affecting her availability. Then he noticed the financial assistance requests, a series of small advances against her salary, all approved by Betty, the previous manager. Digging deeper into the hotel's accounting records, he found several medical bills for Eleanor Collins, Lily's grandmother, partially covered by the hotel's Employee Hardship Fund, a program Reeves had been systematically dismantling since his arrival 6 months ago. The most recent request for a specialized treatment not covered by insurance had been denied. According to the notes, Lily had been seeking alternative financing. "Interesting," Reeves murmured, printing the documents. Financial desperation made people vulnerable, and vulnerability was something he knew how to exploit. Closing his computer, Reeves gathered the evidence of Ethan Montgomery's true identity and Lily's financial struggles into a folder. By morning, he would have a plan to maximize this unexpected opportunity. One way or another, he was going to turn this small-town soap opera into his corporate salvation. Ethan paced the worn carpet of his hotel room, rehearsing different ways to tell Lily the truth. Each attempt sounded hollow, too little too late. How could he explain that he'd lied about his identity while she'd been nothing but honest? How could he make her understand that the connection between them was real even if his name wasn't? A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he found Betty, the front desk manager, her usual warm expression replaced with concern. "Lily asked me to let you know she won't be able to meet with you today," she said. "Her grandmother's condition has stabilized, but she's staying at the hospital for now." "Is there anything I can do?" Ethan asked, his plans for confession temporarily shelved in the face of Lily's family emergency. Betty hesitated. Actually, there might be. Lily was supposed to finish preparing the presentation for the Montgomery team tomorrow. Projections, staffing recommendations, that sort of thing. She's been working on a counter-proposal to their restructuring plan, trying to save as many local jobs as possible. "I could help with that," Ethan offered, seeing an opportunity to use his business expertise for something meaningful. "I have some background in hospitality management." Betty looked relieved. "Would you?" "It's all on her laptop in her office. I'm sure she wouldn't mind given the circumstances." The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. He would be helping Lily prepare a presentation to convince his own family not to implement their standard business model. But perhaps that was exactly what he needed to do, both to help her and to find his own path forward. In Lily's small office off the main lobby, Ethan found her laptop open to a series of spreadsheets and presentation slides. Her counterproposal was impressive, detailed financial projections showing how the hotel could maintain profitability while preserving its local character and most of its staff. She'd identified efficiencies that wouldn't compromise quality and proposed targeted luxury upgrades that would attract high-end customers without alienating the existing clientele. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful, balanced approach that Montgomery Resorts claimed to value but rarely implemented, preferring instead the standardized model that had built their empire. As Ethan refined her presentation, adding insights from his insider knowledge, he realized he was doing more than helping Lily. He was charting a possible new direction for his own family's business. The question was whether anyone would listen to this vision coming from a small-town assistant manager when they'd never bothered to listen to similar suggestions from him. Hours passed as Ethan immersed himself in the work, barely noticing as the hotel quieted for the night. A soft knock pulled his attention from the screen. "You're still here," Lily said from the doorway, her voice tinged with surprise and exhaustion. The shadows under her eyes spoke of hours at the hospital. Ethan stood quickly. "How's your grandmother?" "Stable," Lily replied, entering the office. "They're keeping her for observation, but the crisis has passed. My brother's with her now." Her gaze fell on the laptop. "You've been working on my presentation." "Betty thought I could help. I hope that's okay." Lily moved beside him to look at the screen, close enough that Ethan could smell the faint scent of her shampoo. "You've made some impressive additions," she said, scrolling through his changes. "Where did you learn all this?" The moment to tell her the truth had arrived, yet Ethan found himself hesitating again. "I worked in hotel management before I started traveling," he said instead, another half-truth to add to his growing pile of deceptions. Lily looked at him with new appreciation. "Well, thank you, this is really good." She rubbed her eyes tiredly. "I was so worried I wouldn't have anything substantial to present tomorrow." You should get some rest, Ethan suggested gently. I can finish up here. No, you've done more than enough. Lily saved the file and closed the laptop. I can take it from here. As they walked together through the quiet hotel, Ethan knew he couldn't delay the truth any longer. Lily, there's something I need to tell you. Something important. But before he could continue, her phone rang again. Checking the screen, Lily sighed. It's the hospital. I'm sorry, I have to take this. She answered quickly, stepping away from him. After a brief conversation, she turned back with renewed worry in her eyes. I need to go back. They're moving my grandmother to a different unit. She hesitated, looking torn. The presentation is finished and ready, Ethan assured her. Go be with your family. That's what matters. Gratitude washed over her tired face. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. She squeezed his arm gently. Whatever you wanted to tell me, can it wait until tomorrow, after the Montgomery team leaves? The irony wasn't lost on him. Yes, he said reluctantly. It can wait. Go. Sal. He watched her hurry away for the second time in 2 days. Ethan felt the walls of his deception closing in. Tomorrow, the Montgomery corporate team would arrive, likely people who would recognize him instantly. His time living as Ethan Miller was rapidly running out. The next morning, James Reeves stood before the mirror in his office bathroom, adjusting his tie with precision. Today would change the trajectory of his career. He just needed to play his cards right. The folder containing evidence of Ethan Montgomery's identity sat on his desk beside a separate file of Lily's financial records. Both represented leverage he intended to use at the optimal moment. A knock at his door interrupted his preparations. Enter, he called, expecting one of the staff with last-minute questions about the presentation. Instead, Lily Collins stepped into his office, her expression determined, despite her obvious exhaustion. James, I need to speak with you about the staffing recommendations. The time for discussion has passed, Lily, Reeves replied dismissively. The Montgomery team will be here in an hour. That's why I'm here now, she persisted. Your proposed cuts would devastate this community. I've prepared an alternative that preserves most positions while still meeting the profit targets. Reeves raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. Show me. Lily handed him a printed copy of the presentation she and Ethan had worked on. As Reeves flipped through it, his expression shifted from skepticism to calculation. The proposal was surprisingly solid, professionally presented with compelling financial projections. Someone with significant business acumen had clearly helped her with this. Interesting, he said finally. But ultimately futile. The Montgomerys have a formula that works. They're not interested in local experiments. They might be if someone presented them with the facts, Lily argued. This approach could be a model for integrating other small properties without destroying what makes them special. Reeves set the proposal aside. Your dedication is admirable if misplaced. He studied her for a moment, then decided to test the waters. Your grandmother's medical situation seems quite serious. Lily stiffened, caught off guard by the subject change. She's stable. What does that have to do with the presentation? Healthcare is expensive, Reeves continued smoothly. Especially specialized treatments not covered by insurance. How do you know about... I make it my business to know everything about my staff, Reeves interrupted, including their vulnerabilities. He opened his desk drawer and removed a check. $50,000, he said, placing it on the desk between them. Enough to cover your grandmother's treatment and your brother's first year of college. Lily stared at the check, confusion evident on her face. I don't understand. It's simple, Reeves explained. This check is yours if you agree to drop this alternative proposal and support my recommendations to the Montgomery team. Additionally, I'll ensure you retain a position after the restructuring, perhaps even with a promotion. Understanding dawned in Lily's eyes, quickly followed by disgust. You're trying to bribe me to abandon my colleagues. I'm offering you financial security for your family in exchange for professional cooperation, Reeves corrected. It's a business decision, Lily, nothing personal. It feels pretty personal from where I'm standing, she replied coldly. Where is this money coming from? Hotel funds? Reeves smiled thinly. Consider it an advance from an interested party, someone who values discretion and proper management of potentially embarrassing situations. What situations? Let's just say that certain guests aren't who they claim to be, Reeves replied cryptically, and developing inappropriate relationships with staff could create complications for everyone involved. Lily's expression hardened as she connected the dots. You're talking about Ethan. Am I? Reeves feigned innocence. Interesting that your mind went there immediately. Whatever game you're playing, I'm not interested, Lily said firmly, pushing the check back across the desk. I won't be bought, and I won't abandon the people who depend on this hotel for their livelihoods. Reeves slid the check back toward her. Think of your grandmother, Lily. Think of your brother's future. Are you really willing to sacrifice them for colleagues who would take this money in a heartbeat if offered? For a moment, Lily stared at the check, the weight of her family responsibilities visibly pressing on her. Then she straightened her, shoulders resolution hardening her features. My grandmother raised me to believe that integrity matters more than money, she said quietly. I'd rather face our challenges honestly than solve them through compromise. She turned to leave, but Reeves's voice stopped her. You might want to ask your new friend Mr. Miller about his views on integrity before you make your final decision. Lily paused, her hand on the doorknob. What's that supposed to mean? Ask him yourself, Reeves suggested with a knowing smile. Though I suspect he'll be quite busy when the Montgomery team arrives. Family reunions can be so revealing. Confusion flickered across Lily's face before she shook her head dismissively. Whatever you're implying, save it for someone who cares. I'll see you at the presentation. As the door closed behind her, Reeves's smile widened. He hadn't expected her to take the bribe. It had merely been the opening move in his game. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Now he just needed to watch them grow. The hotel conference room buzzed with tension as staff, members took their seats, all acutely aware that their futures hung in the balance. Lily sat in the front row, her presentation ready despite her exhaustion and Reeves's unsettling insinuations about Ethan. She hadn't seen Ethan since leaving him the night before. Part of her had hoped he would be here to offer moral support, but his absence left an unexpected hollow in her chest. In just a few days, this stranger had somehow become important to her, a connection that felt significant. Despite its brevity, Reeves stood at the podium, practically vibrating with nervous energy as he welcomed everyone. Today marks a historic transition for the Lighthouse Inn, he announced grandly. We are honored to welcome the Montgomery corporate team, who will outline the exciting future of this property. The door opened, and a group of suited executives filed in, led by an imposing older man with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes. Richard Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Luxury Experiences, needed no introduction. His face was featured regularly in business magazines and hospitality industry publications. We're pleased to be here, Richard stated, his voice carrying the polished authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The Lighthouse Inn represents an important addition to our portfolio of authentic coastal experiences. As the executives took their places at the front, Lily scanned their faces, noting the family resemblance among several of them. The Montgomerys were known for keeping leadership in the family, a dynasty of hospitality magnates stretching back generations. Reeves stepped forward again, barely containing his eagerness. Before we begin the formal presentation, I'd like to address a rather unusual situation. He paused dramatically. It seems we've had the honor of hosting a very special guest these past few days, though he chose to stay incognito. Lily felt a sudden chill, Reeves's earlier insinuations echoing in her mind. I believe many of you are wondering where Ethan Montgomery has been these past weeks, Reeves continued, looking directly at Richard. A murmur ran through the executives. Richard Montgomery's expression darkened. My son's whereabouts are not relevant to this meeting, Mr. Reeves. On the contrary, sir, Reeves replied with a smug smile. Your son is extremely relevant, as he's currently a guest in this very hotel. He turned toward the staff. Though you might know him better as Ethan Miller, the backpacker staying in room 118. A collective gasp filled the room as all eyes turned to the door, where Ethan now stood frozen in the entrance, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Lily felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the man she'd thought she knew. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. His refined manners, his business knowledge, his careful avoidance of personal details. She'd been sharing her fears and dreams with the very person orchestrating the corporate takeover that threatened everything she cared about. Ethan, Richard Montgomery's voice cut through the stunned silence. What is the meaning of this? Before Ethan could respond, Reeves stepped forward, playing his role as loyal informant. Mr. Montgomery has been staying here under an assumed identity. For nearly a week, sir. Observing operations, I assume. He handed Richard the folder containing the evidence of Ethan's deception. Richard glanced at the contents, his expression hardening. We'll discuss this privately, he said to his son, his tone brooking no argument. Ethan barely heard him. His eyes were locked on Lily, witnessing the hurt and betrayal transform her features. Lily, please, I can explain. Explain what? She cut him off, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. That you've been lying to everyone. That you sat there, listening to my concerns about losing my job, while knowing you're the one eliminating it. She stood, gathering her papers with shaking hands. I trusted you. It wasn't like that, Ethan insisted, taking a step toward her. Mr. Montgomery, Reeves interjected smoothly. Perhaps we should proceed with the scheduled presentation before. Personal matters further disrupt our agenda. Richard nodded curtly. Excellent suggestion. Ethan will address this situation afterward. Please take a seat. The command in his father's voice was so familiar that Ethan almost complied automatically. But as he looked around the room, at the executives waiting impatiently, at Reeves's triumphant smirk, at Lily's devastated expression, something shifted inside him. For the first time, he saw the situation with complete clarity. No, he said, quietly. Richard Montgomery turned to his son, disbelief etched on his face. Excuse me? I said no, Ethan repeated, his voice stronger. I won't sit down and pretend this is business as usual. He looked directly at Lily. Yes, I lied about my name, but everything else, everything that matters was real. Ethan, this is highly inappropriate, his father warned. What's inappropriate is treating people like disposable assets, Ethan countered, addressing the room at large. What's inappropriate is dismantling a community institution without understanding its value. He gestured toward Lily. She's prepared an alternative proposal that maintains profitability while preserving what makes this place special. At least hear her out before you implement a cookie-cutter solution. Richard's jaw tightened dangerously. You've clearly lost perspective during your vacation. We'll discuss this privately. Actually, Lily spoke up, her professional demeanor reasserting itself despite her personal turmoil, I would like the opportunity to present my proposal. She turned to Richard, meeting his intimidating gaze directly. Unless Montgomery Resorts is afraid of considering innovative approaches. A tense silence filled the room. Richard Montgomery was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by hotel staff. Yet something in Lily's steady gaze gave him pause. Very well, Miss. Collins. Lily Collins. Ms. Collins, Richard nodded. You have 15 minutes to make your case. As Lily moved to the podium, Ethan felt a complicated mixture of pride and regret wash over him. She was extraordinary, poised and determined even in the face of personal betrayal, and he had hurt her in ways he wasn't sure could be repaired. His deception had been exposed in the worst possible way, and now he stood at a crossroads more significant than the one that had brought him to Seaport Cove. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He couldn't go back to being the person he was before he met Lily Collins. Lily's presentation to the Montgomery team was flawless, balancing luxury with local character, proposing sound financial projections and efficient staffing plans. Though she never looked at Ethan, she channeled her hurt into conviction, her voice growing stronger with each slide. Implementing this approach would allow Montgomery Resorts to establish a new model for acquisition, preserving what makes each property unique while meeting profit targets, she concluded. Richard Montgomery studied her thoughtfully. An interesting perspective, Miss Collins, unorthodox but not without merit. Before Reeves could object, the conference room door burst open. Sandra Chandler, Ethan's intended fiancée, strode in, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Richard, I thought we agreed I would be included in all acquisition meetings," she said, her tone casual yet edged with steel. Her gaze found Ethan. "Hello, darling. Interesting new look." Lily glanced between them, the final puzzle piece clicking into place. This polished woman was the arranged marriage Ethan had mentioned that first night. As the meeting concluded, Ethan tried to catch Lily's eye, but she deliberately avoided his gaze. Sandra intercepted him before he could follow. "Your father's waiting," she reminded him, "and we have much to discuss about your adventure." Ethan watched helplessly as Lily slipped out. The walls of his previous life were closing in, embodied by his father's commanding presence and Sandra's proprietary hand on his arm. At the hospital cafeteria, Lily stared at her cold coffee, replaying every conversation with Ethan in her mind. Had he been laughing at her behind his sympathetic smile? "Lily Collins," James Reeves interrupted her thoughts, sliding uninvited into the seat across from her. He placed a check on the table. "The offer still stands, $50,000. "Why?" she asked. "What do you get out of this?" "Consider it an apology for the Montgomery deception," Reeves replied smoothly, "and insurance against potential legal complications. A wealthy heir pretending to be someone else to get close to an employee. Some might see that as predatory behavior." "That's not what happened," Lily protested automatically. "Isn't it?" Reeves raised an eyebrow. "This ensures everyone's interests are protected. Your grandmother needs treatment, your brother needs tuition, and this solves both problems." The weight of family responsibility pressed on Lily's shoulders. "I need time to think." "Of course," Reeves stood, "but don't take too long. The Montgomery family returns to New York tomorrow after the gala. Once they're gone, so is this opportunity." "What exactly were you thinking?" Richard Montgomery demanded, pacing his hotel suite. "Disappearing without notice, adopting a false identity. Do you have any idea of the liability you've created?" Ethan sat quietly, letting his father's lecture wash over him. Beside him, Sandra maintained a composed expression. "The merger announcement is scheduled for tomorrow," Richard continued. "The contracts are drawn up, the press is invited, and now we have to contend with whatever this stunt was." "It wasn't a stunt," Ethan said. "I needed space to think. Thinking happens in boardrooms, not while play acting as a backpacker in some coastal backwater." "Richard," Sandra interjected smoothly, "perhaps Ethan was simply conducting hands-on market research, experiencing our properties from the guest perspective." The escape route she offered was clear. Plausible business explanation. The old Ethan would have taken it gratefully. "No," he said instead. "I came here because I needed to figure out if I could go through with the life that's been planned for me, including the merger, including the engagement." Richard's expression darkened. "This is not the time for a quarter-life crisis. The merger represents years of strategic planning." "And what about responsibility to the communities where we operate?" Ethan challenged. "To the people whose livelihoods we disrupt." "This is about that girl, isn't it? The one who gave the presentation." "Lily," Ethan corrected. "Her name is Lily, and no, it's not just about her. It's about everything I've seen here. A community that functions as a whole, where the hotel is an integrated part of the local economy." After Richard left, Sandra turned to Ethan. "Are you trying to destroy everything we've worked for? This merger has been in development for years." "I can't go through with it, Sandra. Not now." "Because of some local girl you've known." "For a week?" Sandra laughed brittlely. "We both know these distractions happen." "Sandra, be honest. Do you actually want to marry me, or is this just what's expected of us?" Sandra's expression softened slightly. "What I want is irrelevant. We're compatible. We understand the business, and we'll make strong strategic partners. And that's exactly what I'm questioning," Ethan said quietly. "Whether that world is one I want to continue inhabiting." Sandra studied him. "The merger can proceed without a marriage. It's less elegant but achievable with the right financial..." Restructuring. I'm not desperate to be Mrs. Montgomery. I have my own ambitions. Thank you, Ethan said sincerely, for understanding. I didn't say I understand, Sandra corrected. I think you're having a crisis of privilege and you'll regret this impulsive decision. But it's your life to ruin. Ethan found Lily at the hospital later that evening. What are you doing here? She asked coldly. I needed to see you, he replied. To explain. You lied about who you were. You let me pour my heart out about losing my job to your family's company while knowing exactly who was behind it all. What possible explanation could justify that? None, Ethan admitted. What I did was wrong. But Lily, everything else was real. My feelings for you, my admiration for your strength, that was all genuine. Lily shook her head, fighting back. Tears. How can I possibly believe that? How can I trust anything you say now? You can't, Ethan said simply. I haven't earned that trust, but I'm trying to make things right. He handed her a folder. This is a revised proposal for the Lighthouse Inn, incorporating your ideas with additional funding. My father is reviewing it now. Why would he listen to this? Because I made it clear that my continued involvement with Montgomery Resorts depends on it, Ethan replied. Sandra and I have agreed not to proceed with the engagement. That's supposed to impress me, Lily asked bitterly. No, Ethan replied honestly. It's about me finally making decisions based on what I want, not what's expected of me. The honesty in his voice was impossible to dismiss, yet Lily couldn't ignore how his deception had hurt her. Congratulations on your personal growth, she said bitterly, but it doesn't change the fact that you betrayed my trust when I was at my most vulnerable. I know, Ethan acknowledged softly, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. A heavy silence fell between them. In another world, perhaps they could have found each other without complications. In another world, perhaps trust once broken could be easily repaired. I need to get back to my grandmother, she said finally, and you should go prepare for your gala. Lily, please. Goodbye, Ethan, she interrupted firmly. Thank you for the revised proposal. I hope it helps my colleagues. As she walked away, Lily felt something breaking inside her, the fragile hope she'd begun to nurture that maybe life had something unexpected and wonderful in store for her. In her purse, Reeves's check seemed to grow heavier with each step. The Lighthouse Inn's grand ballroom had been transformed for the evening's gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over floral arrangements that incorporated local coastal blooms alongside imported exotic flowers. Outside, the sunset painted the sky in dramatic hues, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. James Reeves surveyed the room with satisfaction, calculating the career advancement this event would bring. Most local staff had been replaced with experienced servers from other Montgomery properties, with only a few select Lighthouse employees retained for local color. Richard Montgomery arrived precisely on schedule in an impeccable tuxedo, followed separately by Sandra Chandler in a midnight blue gown. The only notable absence was Ethan, whose engagement announcement was supposed to be the centerpiece of the evening. Where is your son? Richard asked his wife tensely as they greeted guests. Still in his room last I checked, Margaret Montgomery replied through her smile. Before she could check on him, Ethan appeared at the entrance. Though dressed appropriately, something about him remained different, a resolution in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Finally, Richard breathed. The Breckenridge investors are by the west windows. They're expecting an introduction. Ethan nodded. I'll speak with them, but first, we need to talk about the merger announcement. Richard's expression hardened. There's nothing to discuss. The contracts are signed, the press release drafted. That's not happening, Ethan said quietly. Sandra and I have agreed it's not right for either of us. The merger can proceed without the marriage. Sandra's father has already agreed to the revised terms. You went behind my back to renegotiate with William Chandler. I did what was necessary, Ethan affirmed, just as I've done with the Lighthouse Inn proposal. The board has received the revised plan integrating Lily's recommendations. Across the room, Lily arrived in a simple forest green cocktail dress, looking both beautiful and out of place among the wealthy attendees. Reeves had cryptically invited her, saying there would be Announcements that directly affect your future. Ms. Collins, Reeves greeted, appearing with champagne flutes. I'm so pleased you could join us. Why am I here, James? Lily asked directly. All in good time, he replied with a thin smile. As Reeves was called away, Ethan approached. You came, he said softly. Reeves invited me, Lily replied stiffly, though I'm beginning to think it was a mistake. I'm glad you're here. There are things happening tonight that will affect you. More decisions made by the wealthy for the rest of us? Lily asked bitterly. Before Ethan could respond, Richard Montgomery began his address. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special evening. Tonight we're gathered to share our vision for the future of luxury hospitality in the Pacific Northwest. As Richard continued, Lily noticed Reeves moving purposefully toward the stage. Something's wrong, she murmured. Which brings me to our most exciting announcement, Richard was saying. The merger of Montgomery Resorts and Chandler Hotels. Actually, James Reeves interrupted, taking the microphone uninvited. There's been a change of plans, hasn't there, Mr. Montgomery? Ladies and gentlemen, while Montgomery Resorts has been planning this corporate expansion, the Montgomery heir has been conducting an experiment of his own. Murmurs spread as Ethan stood frozen. For the past week, Reeves continued, Ethan Montgomery has been living among us under an assumed identity, pretending to be a backpacker named Ethan Miller. While his family was negotiating his engagement to Sandra Chandler, he was pursuing a different relationship with one of our local staff members. All eyes turned to Ethan and Lily. Is this true? Someone called from the crowd. Reeves smiled triumphantly. Ms. Lily Collins, would you care to share how it felt to be deceived by the very man whose company is eliminating your job? The spotlight swung to illuminate Lily, standing paralyzed in its glare. This is inappropriate, Richard declared, attempting to reclaim the microphone. The public has a right to know when powerful families play games with ordinary people's lives, Reeves insisted. That's enough. Ethan stepped forward. This isn't about Lily or me. It's about your ambition, Reeves. Is that why you offered Lily $50,000 to keep quiet? Gasps and whispers filled the room. Richard's expression shifted as he studied Reeves, with new intensity. I did no such thing, Reeves denied, though his confidence was visibly shaken. He did, Lily spoke up, finding her voice despite the spotlight. She pulled out the uncashed check. He offered this to me yesterday, supposedly to help with my grandmother's medical bills, but really to buy my silence. She continued, her voice growing stronger. While Ethan did lie about his name, he was the only person from Montgomery Resorts who actually took the time to understand what makes the Lighthouse Inn special. Yes, he should have been honest about who he was. That hurt and it broke my trust, but at least he was honest about who he is, someone trying to find his own path. Richard stepped forward, reclaiming control. James Reeves, you're terminated. Effective immediately. He gestured, and security appeared to escort Reeves away. In a private room afterward, Richard faced Ethan, Sandra, and Lily. What you did was reckless and irresponsible, he told his son. It was also perhaps the most authentic thing you've done in years. Ethan blinked in surprise. What? You think I don't recognize the cage we've built around you? Your mother and I have been discussing it for months. He turned to Lily. Ms. Collins, your presentation yesterday was exceptional. It reflected exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. As for the merger, he continued, addressing Sandra, I've spoken with your father. We agree that forcing an engagement between reluctant participants would be counterproductive. What exactly does this mean for the Lighthouse Inn? Lily asked. For the staff? It means we're implementing your proposal, Richard replied. The Lighthouse Inn will become our pilot program for community-integrated luxury hospitality. Later that evening, Ethan found Lily alone on the hotel's oceanfront terrace. I'm leaving tomorrow, he said, coming to stand beside her. Going back to New York to restructure some things. But I'd like to come back, not as Ethan Miller or Ethan Montgomery, but just as myself. And who do you think that is? Lily asked. Someone who values authenticity over appearance, someone who wants to build something meaningful, someone who met an extraordinary woman and realized he'd never encountered anyone so genuinely herself before. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Lily, despite her wariness. That sounds like someone worth getting to know. I'll be back in a month to begin work on the lighthouse project, Ethan said. If you're willing to work with me, I promise complete honesty moving forward. Lily took a deep breath. Professional collaboration, she clarified. That's where we start. That's where we start, Ethan agreed, hope warming his voice. As they stood side by side watching the moonlight on water, both faced the future with authentic choices rather than prescribed paths. Ethan freed from family expectation, Lily empowered to pursue her vision for the community she loved. The journey ahead would require building trust, one careful step at a time, perhaps discovering that true connections can sometimes emerge from flawed beginnings. Standing there in the moonlight, both felt the first tentative stirrings of something that might, given time and truth, grow into something real and lasting. Fimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan and Lily's journey to authenticity has resonated with you. Their path from deception to honest connection reminds us that sometimes finding ourselves means shedding the identities others have created for us. If you've enjoyed this emotional exploration of trust, truth, and second chances, we've prepared a special playlist with equally compelling stories that delve into the complexities of human relationships. You'll find it by clicking the link to your left. To continue receiving these heartfelt narratives delivered directly to you each day, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Your comments about what touched you most in Ethan and Lily's story help us create content that speaks to your heart. Join us tomorrow for another journey into the depths of human connection. We'll be waiting to hear your thoughts.